So my name is Pat Thomas, and I'm the author of a book called Did It? Jerry Rubin, an American Revolutionary. And for those who know about Jerry Rubin, Abbie Hoffman, they intersected quite a bit with John and Yoko in the early 70s. And much more recently is this fabulous book by Madeline Bocaro. It's called In Your Mind, The Infinite Universe of Yoko Ono. And the way I describe this book is almost like an encyclopedia of Yoko. No, every album, every art exhibition, every opening, every underground movie she made. Obviously, it covers a lot of her years with John, of course, but it more importantly, it covers Yoko separate from John. She was an artist well before she met John, multimedia artist. She continued to do art and make albums after John's tragic death. And so Madeline and I are going to just kind of chit chat a little bit. I like to think of this as the indie rock Dick Cavett show. We just sort of relax and see what happens. So I guess we'll just kind of start with, obviously this book took years and years of work. So maybe you can just kind of tell us, and I know you're a longtime fan, so let's just kind of start with that before we dive into specifics.
Sure. So I didn't know I was writing a book. So that was the beauty of it. It just all kind of came together. I'd been loving Yoko since 1967, before she even was with John publicly. And I was thrilled to find out eventually that she was with him, and followed everything they did together. But more importantly, I loved her artwork and her films. And I would tend to just write. I mean, I was an only child, and back then there were not many publications. So whenever you did see something, I would always save it. And every magazine article, every book, everything, I just kept it all. And luckily I kept it in chronological order. And I would read through this stuff all the time, and I absorb it all, because what else do you have to do when you're 12 years old? And luckily, in the end, I've got boxes and boxes of great interviews from John and Yoko and everybody else around them. And every concert I went to, I'd write about it the next day, every art exhibition. So, it was just a gradual process. And I had a lot of documents, and my boyfriend said, "Hey, here's this software. Why don't you put this, you can put everything in there and organize." And I was amazed that I had 500 pages. So it took me another 2 years to organize it and flesh it out and put it together in a comprehensive way. And I broke all the rules. I really did it my way. They're all short stories. I put all her albums in where they belong in her story, not a discography in the back, because every song has meaning in her life. I spoke about every song on every album, with and without John.
Yeah.
All the events, all the art they did together. And I really just wanted to show her as a human being.
Yeah.
Because, I spent a lot of time with her. I had been writing letters to her, and she would always write back. And I was amazed that she had the time, or that she would even consider it. But I think she realized, how much I got her work, and I loved it. And, back then when somebody would talk about her work, her eyes would light up. I was like, "Oh, really? You want to talk about me and not John or the Beatles?" So she invited me to all her exhibitions and openings, and John's artwork she was showing at the time, and concerts. So we really got to talk a lot, and she's just so wonderful. Once you meet her, you know exactly why John loved her. He was highly evolved, pretty much. Anybody else would have bored him to death.
Right.
She was just so exciting to him. She was wonderful. She freed him up in so many ways. And I just felt it was my responsibility, having all this knowledge, and the way it all came together organically. And I put all the puzzle pieces together. It's mostly in her voice.
Yeah.
Go to my folders and say, "Okay, I'm writing about this album. What did she say about this song? I remember it was an NME," and I would just grab the quote, and it's all there.
Yeah, like I said, I see it kind of almost as it's obviously a book you can read from start to finish. To be honest, I kind of read it. I just jumped around, I want to read about Plasagonal Band, or I want to
Mhm.
read about some of the films, And so it's like a reference library all in one place,
Yeah,
And
that sounds a little like boring though. It's really, little stories and told very succinctly. If anybody else had written about this breadth of her work, it would have been 2,000 pages. But, she always spoke very directly, simply,
right,
like haiku. And
yeah,
I was like, no, I'm not a wordy person. I don't like analysis, intellectualism, critique, none of
right,
that. It's just, you
yeah,
know, I really prefer things that are written by fans or admirers of a person than
sure,
someone who's just out to write the evil side of them or
right,
whatever. And there's no evil. She's wonderful.
yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, because a lot of people think that Yoko is hatched out of an egg 2 minutes before she meets John. So I want to kind of talk about those early New York years. She attends Sarah Lawrence, right?
Mhm.
College. She is traveling the same circles as like people like John Cage. I recently found this great photo of her and Yoko Ono in Andy Warhol's factory.
All
So
right.
just tell us some of the highlights and interesting things about her in New York pre John.
Pre-Dawn was, well, her childhood was in Japan, but then she came here with her parents. Her childhood is a whole other fascinating story. Her ancestry, it's incredible. But she was at Sarah Lawrence and she wasn't finding anything that she really felt she could connect with. And one of her professors said, there's this group of artists in Manhattan. You should seek them out. They're doing kind of like what you're into, 12-tone music and just kind of weird stuff. So
Mhm.
she went to New York and she found John Cage and Toshi Chanagi, who was a composer who was from Japan, born in the same year as her, but they met in New York and they got married here. And they hooked up with John Cage and Mayuzumi, and they started performing together in Japan and New York. She started on her own the Chambers Street concert series because she realized there was no place, no venue for these people to perform in the city. So she rented a loft and
Mhm.
lived there, like basically in poverty. She had orange crates that she assembled as a bed or a table, whatever she needed. And
Yeah.
she had this open space for all these performers to play. And everybody came. We saw Noguchi, Peggy Guggenheim, and
Mm.
Duchamp, and Cage, and all them. They Lamont Young was in
Oh,
there, and George McHunis really liked what was going on. He was starting Fluxus at the time, and she got
mhm.
grouped in with the Fluxus artist. She was just really, really close with George. They were
Yeah.
on the same wavelength.
So piano is her primary instrument, right?
Yeah, she plays
Yeah,
piano. She's
right.
classically trained. She can write notation.
Sure.
Her classes in school were to young children only of privilege were taught musical education at a young age.
Yeah.
And she was prestigious school, and she had to transcribe the notes of the birds singing.
Hmm.
And she found that was really impossible to replicate. So that's where she realized we have problems with the way we notate music. And, she started writing messages on the musical staff saying, play this with the accompaniment of birds at dawn. So in other
Well,
words, you know what it sounds like, just use
yeah.
that. So that was the start of her instructional pieces.
And she's really like one of the very first, what I call performance artists. For example, one of the most famous, infamous things that she does, isn't she on stage and she has people come up with scissors and cut
Yeah.
off little pieces of her outfit,
That
right?
was called cut piece. And people think that was really, just like a feminist statement, having a woman saying,
Mhm.
having people take her clothing, but it was really for her about giving, because she realized that art is always on a wall. It's got a value. It's there to be admired, but she didn't like that. She wanted art. She used this art as a valuable tool for communication, to
Yeah.
change people's minds, make people think. And she just felt that instead of the artist pushing something on you. She wanted the audience to take something away, and it was all based on Buddha and how he gave everything in his life away, even his own body and soul. So that was what the deep meaning behind it. And she always wore her most expensive clothing to those events, so that it was of value to her, of what she was giving.
I know that every Beatles fan knows this story, but I'll have you step us through it, which is her being in London. She has this exhibition. John walks up the ladder. I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, it was Ithaca Gallery. The owner was John Dunbar. He was married to Marianne Faithfull at the time. And Yoko's in there the night before the opening. She's setting up all her works. Now they're all painted white, and there's a white board on the wall with nails, and that's hammer nail painting. There's white ceiling, everything, the ladder leading up to this painting on the ceiling that's got a magnifying glass hanging down. And John walks up the ladder, and he takes the magnifying glass, in tiny letters in the middle, it says yes. And at the time, he'd had it with avant-garde art. He thought, oh, they're all pretentious, they're all negative, they're all making fun of everything. But he saw this positive message. Plus, she was there, he just fell in love with her right away. And they connected because he said, can I hammer a nail in the painting? And she said, well, it was the opening. She didn't want it damaged, she wanted, and he said, okay, well, can I hammer an imaginary nail? And she said, okay. And that's when they realized they clicked, and they got each other. But the thing is, one of the reviews of my book says you hit the imaginary nail on the imaginary head.
Oh, that's funny. That's good. Let's jump forward to her Plasagonal Band record. The thing that I love is I can't think of another time that a creative couple each released an album at the same time that had this sort of, at first glance you think the artwork is exactly the same, but it's slightly different, of course, on the front, and then the matching the childhood pictures on the back. But her album is really a template for like the B-52s. People forget that Ornette Coleman is playing on it. So just talk about that record a little bit, because it's so ahead of its time.
It really is. I mean, the Ornette Coleman piece was something she had done with him in London. He asked her to perform with his band. So she gave them the instructions, and they had to play, like, it was called emotion modulation. And she wrote out in words how the instruments should sound. So that was pretty cool. It was really a wild piece. And then the rest of it was during John's sessions, it was just John, Ringo, and Klaus Voormann on his album. He set Yoko up in the studio with them and said, go. And they played these complete tracks, and they decided to make it her album, which who knows if she would have ever done an album on her own if she hadn't met him, And what happened was, the thing she had done with Ornette was just really free form, while she had done some noise pieces with John Cage. But this set of stuff was all Ringo on drums. And this is the first time she really had a beat and got in a groove. And she said that, that's what he gave her, a root in the beat, and he grounded her.
Some of it, like the sort of throbbing bass of Klaus Voormann, sort of reminds me of definitely an influence on early Public Image Limited.
Oh, yeah, and Elisa, especially. That sounds like why.
Now the thing, and I was guilty of this in my youth, because that was the album that most of us heard, and we weren't quite sure what to make of it in our youth. We skipped over, I did anyway, that her later albums are more sort of singer-songwriter albums, that there's really beautiful songs. And the two albums that made the most impression on me a few years later was Fly, and then is it called Approximately Infinite Universe?
Yeah, that's right? The symbol. It's 50 years today that it was released.
Wow.
Well, January, and US and then UK on the 18th.
Yeah. And she's using like New York session men, some of the same people that John had used. And I think one or two might even played on McCartney's Ram.
That was Dave Spinoza later. Yeah.
Yeah. So just talk about like her her song, her singer-songwriter oriented albums, because some people are probably still need to be turned on to those.
Yeah, well, after that Plasagonal Band's album, that was her first. She did Fly, which was a little bit more. She had a couple of rockers on there. She had Midsummer New York and Mine Train, which is kind of krautrock in a way.
Mhm.
It was fantastic stuff. And she also had some stranger pieces with instruments created by Joe Jones, who was from the Fluxus school, that were played by the wind. They're just very strange percussion instruments and things. And I love some of those things. And then that was the companion piece to John's Imagine album.
Sure.
And then they broke out of the companion thing. She did another double album, which was Approximately Infinite Universe. And that's the one I think it's most accessible. It's Elephant's Memory is on it. Fantastic musicians, Stan Bronstein on sax, just great string arrangements by Ron Frangipane, who was the guy who did keyboards on Sugar Sugar from the Archies.
Oh, wow. That's a fun.
I realize who's on these records. But some of those songs on there are so beautiful, like Winter Song. It's just, the lyrics are so beautiful. They're really influenced by Japanese imagery. And John always says he wished he had written that song himself. And then she also has Death of Samantha on there, which is beautiful, but it's heart-wrenching because it's about the first infidelity that John committed, and all that went down in the time with Jerry and Abby and the whole heavy scene. So that's when they split up for a while.
Yeah. Now, one thing that a lot of music fans still don't realize, I was a big fan of an album called Big Star Third by Alex Shaw and Big Star. And there's this really ominous Holocaust, right? And so I knew the Holocaust song forwards and backwards.
Oh, really?
And then a few years later, I believe the song's called Mrs. Lennon, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the Holocaust, have you heard the demo? That sounds even more like Yoko's song.
Yes, it does. It does. Yeah. And so for those of you that are watching this and don't know it, there's a song called Mrs. Lennon, and that's on Approximately Infinite Universe, right?
No, that's on Fly.
Oh, it's on Fly. Okay, stand corrected. It's on Fly, and it's the same chords, the same melancholy thing.
Haunting. Yeah.
Haunting. Children heard it. Obviously the lyrics are totally different, but the music is practically the same, and it's just a wonderful homage, and it shows that Yoko in her own way was as influential as John to musicians, for sure.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Even Sean, her son, he grew up to be her musical director, and he was in her band for years, and he's her biggest fan. He's great. He's like having John by her side most of the time because he goes wild with her.
Yes. Yeah. It's so wonderful. One thing that unfortunately only a few of us have seen, because they've never really been properly released, is a lot of the experimental films that her and John did. It's too bad there's not a DVD or something. Are some of those on YouTube? I haven't really checked lately.
They used to be on and off. I haven't checked. I mean, she used to show them actually before some of her concerts. She would play mostly bottoms, which was really funny. But she did some, when there was the big exhibition of her work, a retrospective at MoMA in 2015. She did a whole night of talks about her films, and we're sitting with her in the front row watching. And then she spoke about them all afterwards. It was really great. And she did Fly and Rape and
right. And there's some famous bottoms. If I can't remember who, but there's a few.
Yeah, I mean, not super famous, but yeah, some of her Fluxus colleagues, and I think David Johansen is not in the bottom. He might be in Up Your Legs Forever.
Right.
It's a whole bunch of people, intellectuals mostly, because she said she wanted the ad in the paper was, I want intellectual bottoms.
That's funny. Yeah, that is very funny. Another thing that I recently found out, which came as a big surprise, is, and it was only circulated ever so briefly, there's a collaboration in the 90s between her and Sean and the McCartneys, right?
Mm-hmm. Hiroshima Sky is Always Blue.
Yeah.
I was talking about this in another interview because Paul was supposedly the avant-garde one before John. He was listening to all the 12 tone composers and said he was making tape loops and all. And there's this quote where he says to John, I'm going to make an album that's called Paul McCartney Goes Too Far. And John says, hey, great, go ahead, go for it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
he didn't do that, but he did jam with Yoko. You see him in the Let It Be, the Get Back, whatever it's called now.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But,
One of the things that really touched me as a fan of all of the Beatles and all of their spouses is when Linda Eastman died prematurely. Yoko wrote such a touching piece for Rolling Stone. Do you remember that piece?
yeah, I do. Remembering Linda, and in it, she's talking about John and Paul's relationship as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because it's easy for the rest of us to project our stuff, positive or negative, on these people. And yet there's only a handful of people that knew what it was like to be a Beatle or to be a Beatle wife,
right.
And I thought she really touched on the fact that, her and Linda were in the trenches together, fans angry that they had gotten married, et cetera, et cetera.
They had a lot in common in their backgrounds too. I mean, Linda's mother had died in a plane crash. And she had gone to Sarah Lawrence College, not at the same time, but same college as Yoko. And they both had young children around the same age when they met their Beatles.
Yeah.
They were in the same position of scapegoat, really. I mean, somebody needed to be blamed for these Beatles breaking up. And, she was saying that she realized that John and Paul weren't so buddy-buddy. There was this tension there. And even Linda said that if only they could have communicated,
Right.
things would have been a lot better. And it was loosening up right there towards the end.
Yeah, there's a lot of what ifs. I mean, the other thing is that we now know that John and Yoko would have done a tour to promote Double Fantasy,
Yeah.
which would have been incredible.
It was going to be, they were going to play places they'd never been before. They wanted to play in Japan and Iceland, which is ironic because Iceland is where the Imagine Peace Tower is now, that John, the light tower.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's all plans that never came to be.
Yep. I really think, and I hope that your book goes a long way in sort of just making people realize that Yoko is wonderful, is a warm human being, a creative human being. I mean, it's hard to live under the shadow of any Beatle, and the way John died, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's great that she's really, she's a strong person and has really carved out her own place in the world. In fact, one of the things we haven't touched on, as I'm sort of free associating here, is her influence on John with the peace movement and her continued work and that type of stuff. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Well, yeah, the first thing they did together, it stems from the conversation of John telling her he's leaving the band. And she says, I was so nervous because I was thinking, what's he going to be preoccupied with while I do my work? And he, on top of that, said, oh, now it's just you and me. And she said, well, wait a minute, I don't collaborate. I do my thing. But somehow they just stepped in, and next thing you know, they're planting acorns, they're doing the bed-ins, they're doing the bagism, they did the war is over posters, and they just decided upon peace, which is as good a thing as any to promote peace and truth and love. And that's what they went with. And I just have this feeling, you just see them every day. They were in the news back then, even from America, is always a little clip of them. What are John and Yoko doing today? And here they are in bed. Is the newspaper clipping, people making fun of them, people praising them. It was great. It was a great time.
So before we turn the record button on, you had mentioned you had been at the Madison Square Garden concert in '72, right?
Yes.
And you mentioned that through the years you've intersected with Yoko at art openings, and you've traded messages and letters with her. So just talk a little bit about that you've been lucky enough to have a little bit of a personal connection with her, which is wonderful.
Yeah, well, I was 14 for the one-to-one concert. I just got
Mhm.
lucky because they added a matinee show. I didn't even know about the night show. It sold out. And I happened to see an ad in my mother's newspaper for the second show. And I was like, oh, great. So I went to that, and it was spectacular because John and Yoko were alternating songs like on Sometime in New York City. Only John was doing stuff from his first Plasagonal Band. He did Mother and did Instant Karma. And Yoko was doing Born in a Prison, and she did a lot of great stuff. That one song wasn't even broadcast in the night performance when they filmed it, so I got to see that. And Stevie Wonder played a lot of different bands, and it's fantastic. I think John didn't come together, and that's when you heard his Beatle voice come out. And like, oh my God, I forgot he was a Beatle. And I don't know, I started writing to her once they moved into the Dakota, like later on. And she would always write back, and we had this exchange going on. And then one day a friend of mine said, my friend used to go and see John and Yoko at the Dakota all the time and get autographs and all that. And it was before I knew her. But then after John was killed, I think it was like 1984, my friend said, Yoko probably really would love to meet you. You're writing to her. And I said, well, I don't really want to stand out there, and she'll think I'm a Beatles fan or something. And I am. But he said, you know what? I'll go on her birthday, and it's the only way I'm going. And I'm only standing there for 15 minutes. I'm not gonna. So we went, and within 5 minutes, Yoko comes out of Central Park from her birthday ride on a horse and carriage, like Cinderella or something. It was so cool.
Yeah.
And she came right up to us, and I said my name, and oh my God, it's you. And she said, look, I'm showing John's artwork next week at this gallery. I'll send you an invitation. And ever since then, like whatever she was doing, she would send me an invite or concert tickets. So it was really great to just hang with her. And
yeah, that's correct. Now, I unfortunately didn't get a ticket, but she sort of a few years ago, actually more like 10 years ago now, she sort of reunited the Plasagonal Band. There was
I was at those birthday shows and
Klaus Borman,
Eric Clapton.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. Just
one night was a bunch of different bands covering her songs, so it's kind of like a little tribute. And then the next night was her playing her whole thing. And I think Eric Clapton did Your Blues with her and Sean and Klaus, and he also did Death of Samantha. And I'm in the front row with Eric Clapton wailing away in front of me. And I'm just like, I'm living someone else's dream, but it's pretty cool, I guess.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. And obviously, Sean has been an incredible, reflection of both John and Yoko's work, and obviously his own stuff. And you've met him too, which is great.
Yeah, I knew him when he was a little kid, but he wouldn't remember me from then. And just a few months ago, I hooked up with him because of the book, and he was just so thankful and very supportive.
That's great. So we've been talking here with Madeline, the author of In Your Mind, The Infinite Universe of Yoko Ono. And I really, really suggest that everyone checks this out. There's a soft cover version. I believe there's a hardcover version, correct?
The hardcover is only available through me. It's conceptualbooks.com. And the softcover, if you're in Europe, your probably best bet is Amazon for the shipping situation. But a lot of retailers have it online, Target, Barnes & Noble. I guess check, compare prices.
Yeah. So my last question, and not to put you on the spot. Now we already know that she's been blamed for breaking up the Beatles. We don't have to get into that because it's all false. What's another misconception? Like what do you want people to know about Yoko that maybe they have misunderstood or don't know?
Well, maybe that she manipulated John or hypnotized him or whatever, but it's the opposite. She really freed him to be himself.
Yeah.
gave him companionship, love, unconditional, undying. And he was a lot of trouble. He was not easy both of them had the same issues, from childhood, and they were all damaged people. And when they got together, they became this strong unit. And there was no stopping them once they were together. And, they had the separation, they came back together. It's a beautiful love story. It's intense. There's a whole chapter called Premonitions on all these things that she had sung about or written about or thought about decades before that actually came true. Imagery in her films that later became reality, and just really, really spooky. But she's very intuitive, and she comes from another place. All her art is almost metaphysical. She's really in tune with other things, and she's kind of otherworldly, and just a lot you can learn from her. So I throw her wisdom throughout the book. Every page has a quote from her, and I just want people to know that she's an amazing human creator.
And I'll just add, as a Lennon fan, as well as a Yoko fan, without her, there's no Give Peace a Chance, there's no Instant Karma, there's no Power to the People, there's probably no Plasagonal Band.
No Imagine.
There's no Imagine. Large chunks of John's work is inspired by her. Some of it is flat out collaborations, and so some of you like Yoko and you don't even know it, frankly, because she's there within his work. So
yes, definitely.
Okay, well, this has been great. I'm glad we got to do this.
It certainly has. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
My pleasure. And that's Jerry Rubin behind me, in case anybody's wondering. Someone thought it was Charles Manson. No, that's not. Manson is not my bag. It's Jerry.
Oh, by the way, they're releasing a documentary about the Mike Douglas shows with Jerry and all that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'll send you the link. It's called Daytime Revolution. How cool is that? And I love this because that was my mom's favorite show, and she monopolized the one household TV all our lives. And now my people were on her show.
I love it.
Got to enjoy John and Yoko and their guests for a whole week. It was great.
That's great. Okay, cool.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Cheers.